Hello and welcome to Unit 8, Day 5, where today we're going to be talking about how do we use genotypic evidence to support evolution. And this word genotypic looks a little familiar, I hope. Like we've seen it before. So genotype is what's in your genes. And this first question asks us, you're due now, how do mutations impact evolution? So hopefully we remember that mutations are just a change in DNA sequence, right? So this is just a change in your DNA. And evolution is, of course, change over time. And mutations lead to variation in a species. And then within a species, there being variation leads to natural selection, right? Selecting for the best trait for that given environment, and then natural selection leads us to evolution. So mutations lead to evolution by causing changes in the DNA sequence that can ultimately lead to change over time, aka evolution. So okay, let's continue. So there is a short little paragraph that you must read on your sheet. Aha. What evidence supports the theory of natural selection? Since Darwin first proposed his ideas about biological evolution and natural selection, different lines of research from many different branches of science have produced evidence supporting his belief that biological evolution occurs in part because of natural selection. Because a great amount of data supports the idea of biological evolution through natural selection, and this is not a drill here, people, millions of experiments have been conducted by millions of scientists all over the world, amateur scientists, professional scientists, and all of this data supports biological evolution. But we still call it a theory because that's what theory means in science. Theory means a unifying explanation that is supported by a preponderance of data, preponderance of evidence. And because no scientific evidence has yet been found to prove this idea false, which is not really something you can do in science, but I'll let Renee Fester-Kratz, phrase it however they want. This idea is considered a scientific theory because lots of evidence supports scientific theories. They are usually accepted as true by a majority of scientists. So now we're going to look at several examples, and I'm going to go through those on the slides. We have molecular evidence, which is like amino acids. So something very small, but not in your genes. Genetic evidence, which is like in your genes, DNA. Geological evidence, so this is like of land, fossils. Or phenotypic evidence, which you hopefully remember, phenotype is your physical characteristics, how you look. And we're going to go through several examples. and rate each one. Is it molecular evidence, genetic evidence, geological evidence, or phenotypic evidence? Let's start with the first one. Biochemistry is the study of basic chemistry and processes that occur in cells. What does biochemistry show? All of Earth's organisms share a common ancestry. Wow, this is molecular evidence. And this is a big deal. This means that we all evolved from a common ancestor, and we have the receipts. We have the biochemistry to back it up. All right, the next blank is comparative anatomy. So comparative anatomy is the comparison of the structures of different living things. So what does comparative anatomy show? The best explanation for similarities that various species on Earth evolved from common ancestors. So these are similarities in their structures, so how their body looks, and this is phenotypic evidence. And also there is a word here, so homologous is organisms that evolved from a common ancestor. They share the same bone variations. And analogous means similar structure, different ancestry. All right, next one, biogeography. This is the study of living things around the globe. And what does biogeography show? That groups of organisms that are related to one another will be clustered near one another because related organisms come from the same common ancestor. So they broke off from the common ancestor at some point, but they live near each other. This is geological evidence. This is in the environment. Biogeography is geological evidence. Comparative embryology. We're comparing the embryos of different organisms. This suggests a common ancestor, and this is phenotypic evidence because it's how they look. I'm sorry, I thought there were a lot of cool images in this slideshow, but there's really not. My bad. Molecular biology focuses on the structures and functions of the molecules that make up cells. Molecular biologists that have studied gene sequences amongst different species indicate that similarities among even very different species. So this is molecular evidence. So an example of this would be like the mitochondria, where we have processes like cellular respiration and photosynthesis that occur in many different species, and they occur the same way, which indicates that organisms that undergo cellular respiration, organisms that produce their own glucose through photosynthesis, that those processes didn't arise separately. Rather, those processes emerged, and then these organisms split off from a common ancestor. All right, paleontology, study of prehistoric life through fossil evidence. What do the fossil records show? Detailed evidence of the changes in living things through time. And this is phenotypic evidence and genetic evidence. So we can see how these organisms look compared to each other, and then we can also test their DNA if there's any around, which there's more DNA in like specimens preserved in things like tar pits or like deep frozen, like in Siberia. And modern examples where we can use scientific experiments to measure evolutionary change. And usually this is looking at genetic evidence. So we're looking at DNA sequencing. And this is where all like the hot and spicy work is happening right now in biology. And radioisotope dating, which estimates the age of fossils. Radioisotope dating, usually called also carbon dating. but other isotopes can be used. So isotopes are different forms of atoms that make up matter on Earth. Some isotopes, called radioactive isotopes, discard particles over time and change into other elements. And this is molecular or geological evidence. A fossil named Archaeopteryx has many features in common with reptiles, but also, like birds, shows evidence of feathers. So this is phenotypic evidence. The genetic code of all life on Earth is written in the same chemical building blocks, genetic evidence. Right, so all the life on Earth has the same genetic code, genetic evidence for evolution. In the 1940s, infections by the bacterium Staphylococcus aureus could be treated successfully with penicillin. Today, populations exist that are completely resistant to natural penicillin, as well as to partially modified penicillins like methicillin. These populations, called MRSA, are very challenging to modern medical professionals. This is molecular evidence because they can produce molecular sequences that make them resistant to penicillin. We're actually going to watch a video about these whales. Whales have tiny useless bones inside the rear portion of their bodies that are very similar to the bones found in vertebrate legs. We can see the similarity. This is phenotypic evidence. Human embryos have gill slits like those seen in fish embryos. Developing fish retain their gill slits, whereas humans do not. This is comparative embryology, which is phenotypic evidence. Are we going through all of these examples on your notes sheet? I'm not 100% sure at this point, guys. It's the end of a very long day. All right, guys, I don't know if that slideshow that I was going through was totally relevant to all this or what, but let's just quickly go through these answers here. So we already said this one. This is biochemistry. And this is molecular evidence. This is homologous structures. And this is phenotypic evidence. All right, so now examine the comparative anatomy of the bones and the front limbs of humans, cats, whales, and bats pictured to the left. Are the bones shown homologous, evolved from a common ancestor, or analogous, evolved toward a common adaptation, such as the wings of an insect versus the wings of a bird? Wings of a bird. Structures, explain. So, homologous structures. This is a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat. And we can think they have the same bones, right? You can see they're color-coded. Does a human use their arm for the same thing a cat uses their arm for the same thing a whale uses their fin for the same thing a bat uses their wing for? No, definitely not, right? They have different jobs, but they evolved from a common ancestor. Analogous structures may be an example of evolution of a similar structure, right? Like bats, for example, have wings, so do some insects, and so do birds, but they all evolved that adaptation to fly from different ways. So they're not very closely genetically related, whereas all of these are homologous. And they have different functions, but they share a common ancestor. We also should be able to note that these are all mammals. Okay. Blank is the study of living things around the globe. Biogeography. We already went over this one. And this is geological evidence. Guys, on the other hand, if evolution isn't real, there's no reason for related groups of organisms to be found near one another. When biogeographers compare the distribution of organisms living today or those that lived in the past from fossils, they find that species are distributed around the earth in a pattern that reflects their genetic relationships to each other. Comparative embryology is the next one. We already read that. Phenotypic evidence. Oh my gosh. Okay, I see that. I already went through all of these. All right, so these are the blanks: molecular biology, paleontology, modern examples, radioisotope dating. I just like the slideshow so much, I have to keep going through it. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, you know what? That was a journey, but we made it here together, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed or made some sense of Unit 8, Day 5 through those various examples. But we got there, folks. We got there. So, how do we use genotypic evidence to support evolution? Have a great day. See you all on Zoom on Thursday. Bye, guys.